Once this Indonesian official spoke of justice with honeyed words, yet in secret he greedily devoured the rights of the little people. Now that mouth festers, reeking of the stench of sins too foul to hide, while starving worms burrow through his skull, searching for scraps of humanity long sold away. There is no place left to flee, no door left to return, only rotting regret alive in his flesh, until even the world refuses to remember his name. In a land glittering with party lights and sweet promises, a man named Bert Giuliari stood at the pinnacle of power. Every step he took was met with applause, every word he spoke revered like divine wisdom. Dressed in expensive suits, he flashed warm smiles and often appeared on television, speaking of the fate of the common people with glassy eyes, as if overflowing with compassion. Yet behind that noble facade lurked an insatiable dark hunger. To Giuliari, power was not a sacred duty, but a golden field to be harvested before the seasons changed. He saw himself as a petty god above the masses, entitled to take a little, or as much as he could, from what rightfully belonged to them. Behind his broad smile lay a mouth already wet with greed. Behind his firm handshakes with the people hid fingers counting stacks of tainted money. No one knew that within him a black hole had begun to grow, a void that would one day swallow him whole, far sooner than he ever imagined. Giuliari grew ever more adept at wearing two faces. By day he visited traditional markets, patting the shoulders of small-time vendors while promising them a brighter future. But by night, behind the thick walls of his office, he held secret meetings. Around that expensive marble table, he and his cronies divided their cuts from the embezzled social aid funds. Money meant to fill the hungry bellies of those in the nation's forgotten corners. With the same hand that signed pledges of assistance, Giuliari falsified figures. Every document he stamped dug a deeper hole into his soul, a void that could never again be closed. Meanwhile, far away in villages he had never set foot in, the common people waited. They still believed those honeyed promises were real, unaware that their hopes now hung by a rotting thread, ready to snap at any moment. Amid the wine-soaked revelries, amid the raucous laughter echoing through those hidden chambers, a faint foul stench began to creep in unnoticed. The scent of ruin, slowly weaving itself around every fiber of Giuliari's life. In a dusty remote village far from the city center, Lila, a frail 5-year-old girl, sat on the creaky porch of her crumbling home, waiting for her mother to return with food. Her stomach had been empty since morning, her eyes dull, her skin sallow and tinged with yellow. The aid promised by city officials had never reached her village. Only hollow rumors arrived, growing more painful with each passing day. That night, as the cold wind whistled through cracks in the bamboo walls, Layla's tiny body gave out. She slumped her head onto her mother's lap, whimpering softly like a nestling fallen from its nest. In her final breath she managed a faint whisper, "Mom, hungry?" And the earth recorded this small death, a death born from the greed of those who would never even know Layla's name. At that same moment, in a distant, glittering high-rise, Giuliari roared with laughter behind soundproof walls, raising his crystal glass in a victory toast, unaware that a tiny soul had flickered out because of his filthy hands. That night, after Layla's tiny body was laid to rest in a shallow grave, the village's elder mothers gathered under a starless, oppressive sky. They formed a circle in the empty field, raising their wrinkled hands toward the void, and began chanting prayers long held back in their hearts. These were no longer prayers for blessings, no pleas for longevity. Tonight their words had curdled into lamentations that twisted into curses. With tear-stained cheeks now dry, they prayed that whoever had stolen from starving children, whoever had laughed over their suffering, would rot before tasting their ill-gotten gains. A strange wind whispered through, carrying the metallic tang of wet earth, mixed with something fouler, something that stung the nostrils. Through a break in the clouds, the moon peered down, its sickly yellow glow bearing witness as these festering invocations pierced the heavens, hunting for their rightful recipients. None of the women knew that far away in that glittering tower, a celebration had just begun, flowing with red wine and roasted meat. A feast that would become the last supper for one particular guest, Giuliari. Amid the clamor of an extravagant party celebrating the success of the social project, Giuliari stood at the center of the crowd, raising his glass triumphantly. Music swirled, crystal chandeliers glittered, and tables groaned under the weight of lavish dishes. A stark contrast to the hollow stomachs he had ignored. But as the night deepened, Giuliari began to feel something strange in his throat. Something sticky, slimy, and foul clung to the roof of his mouth. He gulped down wine, but the metallic aftertaste wouldn't fade. He bit into roasted meat only to taste something like rancid mud. Panicked, he rushed to the opulent bathroom at the far end of the hall and stared into the mirror, his breath ragged. From the corners of his lips, a greenish fluid slowly oozed, reeking of rot, like carrion baking under the sun. Trembling, he hunched over the sink and retched up a thick, black sludge teeming with something alive, tiny, writhing worms, slick with mucus, squirming out of his throat. Yet when he lifted his head, the mirror reflected only his own smiling face, as if his downfall had only just begun. The morning after the party, Giuliari attempted to carry on as usual. He donned his expensive suit and dabbed concealer over his unnatural pallor. But when he opened his mouth to deliver his press conference speech, the room froze in horror. Thick yellow pus began oozing from the corners of his lips. A putrid stench instantly flooded the room, sending several journalists vomiting on the spot. Giuliari tried to speak, but every word came with globs of foul discharge. The mucus dripped onto the microphone and podium with sickening plop, plop sounds. The faces that once adored him now twisted in revulsion. Cameras lowered as reporters covered their mouths, stumbling backward in terror. Panicked and disoriented, Giuliari fled to his official car. Yet even in the enclosed space, the rotting stench from his own mouth made him gag violently. He coughed up another wave of slime, this time writhing with tiny, squirming larvae. When he checked the rearview mirror, a new horror struck him. His eyes had grown milky and opaque. The skin on his face was losing pigment, peeling away in thin, wet layers like soaked parchment. That night, Giuliari tried to sleep in his luxurious bedroom, hoping the day's horrors were just exhaustion-induced nightmares. But a terrible itching began crawling across his scalp. At first it was slight, mosquito bites perhaps. Within minutes it became unbearable torment. Frantically he scratched his head. Clumps of hair fell away, sticking to his hands now smeared with blood and pus. From the oozing wounds emerged tiny grayish-white creatures, living worms, wriggling their way out from beneath his scalp. Giuliari screamed, slamming himself against the mirror. The reflection showed his scalp torn, apart like rotten earth riddled with insect holes. The worms crawled into his ears, the corners of his eyes, his nostrils. They sought new homes, slowly consuming him from within. And as his screams echoed through the room, no one came to help. Not a single soul. For that night, the world had turned its back on Giuliari, just as he had turned, his back on the cries of starving children. Weak-limbed and his face wrapped in thick bandages to conceal his festering wounds, Giuliari stubbornly forced himself to go to his office. He clung to the desperate hope that within those halls of power, some shred of his authority might remain. But the moment he stepped into the grand lobby, he knew something was profoundly wrong. Staff members who once bowed respectfully now averted their eyes, backing away slowly. Some even fled in terror. The moment his rotting stench reached them, the conference room doors he approached slammed shut violently before him, as if the building itself recoiled at his presence. The once pristine office walls now cracked ominously, oozing dark stains like congealed blood. The luxurious carpet beneath his feet felt damp and spongy, leaving behind viscous, mucus-like footprints with each step. Through the glass windows, his reflection stared back, a blurred silhouette of a maggot-ridden head, a face losing its human form, and a pus-filled mouth gaping silently as if trying to swallow itself whole. There was nowhere left to hide. Even this building, erected with the fruits of his corruption, now rejected his very existence. That night, after being wordlessly expelled from his own office, Giuliari found himself trapped in his private study. Somehow all doors had sealed shut. The phones went dead. The chandelier above swayed unnaturally, its eerie creaking suggesting something more than wind moved through the room. The walls began pulsing slowly like living flesh. From cracks in the marble floor, a viscous black ooze seeped upward, filling the chamber with the metallic stench of decay. Amid this nightmare, faces emerged from the splitting walls. Layla's gaunt visage, the weathered faces of village elders, farmers, laborers, and starving children whose lives he'd devoured. They stared in perfect silence, hollow eyes brimming with condemnation, sharper than 1,000 blades. When Giuliari opened his mouth to beg forgiveness, only putrid worms spilled forth, writhing across the floor like a living tide. His body contorted. His legs gave way. As he collapsed to his knees, the worms began consuming him, gnawing through flesh, coiling around bone until his very form dissolved. In his final moments of clarity, Giuliari understood. This wasn't mere punishment. He was being unwritten from existence, piece by the weight of his own sins. When morning came, the room that had imprisoned Giuliari had transformed into a festering swamp of decay. No marble floors remained, no opulent furniture, just a seething pool of pus, blood, and shapeless creatures writhing across its surface. Giuliari, who once strode arrogantly through halls of power, now lay broken and helpless. His mouth had swollen shut, lips cracked and oozing pus, sealing the cavity completely, leaving him unable to speak, let alone swallow. Each time he strained to scream, only wet, gurgling sounds escaped, the splatter of putrid fluids and the hissing of maggots, fighting their way up his throat. His stomach caved inward, his body desiccated like sun-bleached carrion. Every breath he drew filled his lungs not with air, but with the stench of his own sins, choking him in endless torment. Inside his skull, Giuliari heard faint laughter, not human mirth, but the silent mockery of all the crimes he'd once dismissed as trivial. Now he couldn't swallow anything. Not even the air needed to survive. The world he'd once devoured so greedily was now repaying him in kind, sealing every avenue of life within his body. That night, as shadow swallowed what remained of his office-turned infernal swamp, Giuliari crawled toward the large mirror hanging on the cracked wall. With his pus-covered, wounded body, he desperately sought his reflection, needing to confirm he still existed, that he was still real. But when the image appeared, what stared back was no longer human. Giuliari's face had vanished. In its place writhed a grotesque abomination, formless rotting flesh, a swollen head riddled with dozens of tiny holes where slimy worms crawled freely in and out. No eyes remained, no true mouth, just weeping black voids oozing putrid fluids. Giuliari screamed or tried to, but no sound escaped. The mirror began trembling, and from within its surface, the faces of his victims emerged one by one, silently condemning him. In terror and despair, Giuliari smashed the mirror with his last strength. But every shard that hit the floor revealed more reflections, thousands of faceless, voiceless, merciless versions of himself. That night, amidst the final fragments, Giuliari understood. He no longer belonged to the human world. He had become part of the curse he created, doomed to eternity, among whispering vengeance in the inexhaustible stench of his own corruption. The next morning, the grand government office stood eerily silent. No signs of life remained. Early arriving staff found only Giuliari's office door swung wide open, emitting a putrid stench so foul it made them stagger backward. Inside, no body, no suit, no trace of humanity remained. Just cracked, mucus-smeared floors, and at their center, a single grotesque plant growing. At first glance, a flower, but its petals black as charcoal, surrounded by enormous flies buzzing with deafening intensity. From this unnatural bloom seeped the metallic reek of pus and blood, slowly saturating the air. Those who stared too long swore they saw faces in its petals. Tiny, weeping visages, as if the flower contained all the souls sacrificed for Giuliari's greed. From that day, the office was sealed shut. No one dared touch it. No one spoke Giuliari's name above a whisper. And on windy nights, faint murmurs escaped the old building's walls, the sound of countless worms writhing beneath the floorboards, repeating one phrase endlessly: "What you have swallowed shall swallow you whole." Final moral: to steal from the powerless does not merely rob the world. It summons an eternal curse, one that rots the soul long after the body disappears.